Hello everyone, my name is Jocelyn, you may call me Joy, and today I am going to be making a video that I was in two minds about making because a lot of other people have already talked about this, but I feel like the conversation goes on and it would be at least worth me putting out there my thoughts and opinions about this. So today we're going to be talking about Dave Chappelle. For those people who don't already know, Dave Chappelle is we'll be nice and say comedian, because that is what he gets paid for professionally. Well, he released a special on Netflix recently that elicited controversy, putting it nicely. I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say that he garnered a lot of ire from the trans community for the things he said. And critics include other such great trans YouTubers such as Jessie Gender and Cat Black and Samantha Lux. And it's to her first video about this topic where we begin. So on the 29th of October, Samantha Lux released a video called Yes, Dave Chappelle's Comedy is Transphobic. Trans Woman Reacts. Just as a sort of preemptive warning here, this video is going to be quite a bit of a they said, I said, he said, she said bullshit kind of thing. But I'm doing it in this way to try and illustrate a point. So these conversations are all pulled from the comment section of that video, although this literally could have happened under any video that was criticizing or critiquing Dave Chappelle. Samo Abdallah says, I'd appreciate it, Samantha, if you could show some clips of the special as well as you commentating on it as well, just to provide more context to the situation if you're making a statement on him. I do want to clarify that I do agree with you, however I feel like more people would benefit from knowing in your video the parts where he says the things in his special on Netflix. And this is a fairly, reasonable request. I then replied, another YouTuber called Jessie Gender made a couple of excellent videos about this topic and she used examples from the special. Watch them and you'll see Samantha wasn't taking Chappelle out of context. However, the comments get pretty sour quickly. Richie then replied, well, in a sense, is all out of context because they are not taking in the context of it's a comedy show and not necessarily his actual opinions or real-life events. For example, he joked that if he sucked off a priest, should we take that ultra-literally and get offended? Also the context of nobody is forcing you to watch it. Richie, honey, those things aren't context. Whether or not the comedy show was reflective of his real-life opinions or not, and I'm going to argue that they are, but for the sake of argument, it doesn't matter. What matters is the effect of what he said. And also, well, you'll see where I go with the next part. I said, your argument is not compelling. It's clear that this comedy is based on Chappelle's real opinions. And yes, I get that no one is being compelled to watch the special, but he did a bad thing and is getting criticized for it. He is putting out very harmful narratives about trans people who are affected by the attitudes of others, whether we watch the special or not. Richie then replied, if you are just criticizing because you don't like this style of comedy but would still fight for his right to say it and not be cancelled, then I'm with you. And if you actually thought that what he was saying was 100% truthful and his opinions are not altered for comedic effect, I would have to really question your morality. Really? I don't think that's the thing you want to question. If what you are upset about is trans jokes, because he made way worse jokes about things that would be real unsolved felonies that he is confessing to, and things that are physically impossible and would change science as we know it. LOL. Also, one thing I never see from people criticizing him is specifics. So what do you think was the most offensive joke? So I am going to get into a little bit about the whole freedom of speech angle on this after I've looked at these comments. I said, like I've said elsewhere, he dead named a trans woman and called her a man. That's not funny insult comedy. That's just insulting. Laughing at someone because of their ridiculous actions is funny. Laughing at them because she's a trans woman is hate speech. The whole special was full of disrespectful stereotypes that caricature trans women negatively or masculine, sometimes both. Richie said, "And that's your opinion based on a cult-like worldview. I thought it was hilarious and so did many LGBTQ people." It's the look I have a black friend argument. Woohoo! And don't think I didn't ignore that other part about the cult. Oh no. His comedy, like a R-rated movie, is meant for a mature audience. A lot of people are not mature enough to see his special. You see the implication there that he's saying that I'm not mature enough for adult jokes, but that's not the point. Part of being mature is being able to separate entertainment from reality. It's like if you took a kid to a scary R-rated movie and they started crying because it was too scary. A mature person would tell that kid, it's okay, it's just a movie. Same goes for this. It's okay, it's just a Netflix show. The scary black boogeyman is not going to hurt you. And the race card gets played too. Great. We love to see that from someone who's misunderstanding the criticism, whether deliberately or not. Rory Nolan says Samantha is taking it out of context. She didn't even mention what the special was actually about. His friend committing suicide after receiving huge amounts of harassment and bullying from trans community. Considering it was what the show was about is an odd thing to leave out. Now, Samantha already made a second follow-up video to this one addressing the friend who committed suicide. But, yeah. There's also a lot of criticism about the way in which he talked about his dead friend. And some of the details that were missed out and some of the ways in which he was like portraying her is not exactly reflective of what actually happened. And I'm gonna just go ahead and say I'm not going to talk about that when it's already been discussed in depth by other people. Go watch their videos. Kat Black did a pretty good expose on that. Jessie Gender, Samantha Lux, those three names are the ones you need to know here because they all together paint a really interesting picture about not just what Dave Chappelle said, but also the impact that it has. And we're going to talk more about the impact in a few other comments. I replied to Richie, saying, "I disagree with you, therefore you think I have a cult mindset? That doesn't track. Some people thought it was funny. That's a fact I'm not trying to dispute. I'm saying I agree with Samantha saying it was harmful and transphobic. And the fact that he's black really has nothing to do with anything. I've called out transphobia from white people too, so unbunch your panties." I then replied to Rory, saying, actually, the friend who committed suicide is not the main focus of the special. She was one part at the end. And being harassed online doesn't seem to be the sole contributor for her action. She apparently struggled with mental health for years. Chappelle is dishonestly framing it as all the transgenders' fault, which it clearly is not. I'm trans, yet I've never been part of a Twitter mob. That shit is not worth my time. Watch the second Jessie Gender video for the details on this. Richie then replied to me, well, let's see if you have a cult-like view or can separate ideology and reality. Do you agree with this statement? There is no difference between a trans woman and a non-trans woman. If so, explain why you believe so. Do you think gender identity is superior to all other self-identities? For example, do you think gender identity is more valid than, say, a white person with BDD that identifies as Asian? In the biological context, how many genders are there? Can a male get pregnant? Do trans women have an advantage over other women in sports? Now, I will answer those questions, but before I do, I'm going to show you what my response was. I said, you are not the arbiter of what is and is not a cult, and your questions have nothing to do with cults. You want to talk cults? I suggest you refer to the Bite Model by Stephen Hassan. I may have spelled that name wrong. Why are you even trying to separate ideology and reality? There can be an overlap. Why do you even care what my answers would be? I am not the spokesperson for all trans people in the world ever, even if that would be a cool job. Richie replied, if your ideology is exactly the same as others, and that ideology denies certain realities, and the only way you can deal when confronted with those realities is to name call or avoid them, then yes, I would say that is a cult-like mentality. And I am curious to know how you answer, because I'm pretty sure I know exactly how you will answer those questions, because I have talked to other people with your exact same cult-like ideology. I could be wrong, but if you can't answer simple questions, then you might want to ask yourself why. He keeps throwing this word cult around a lot. I don't think he knows exactly what it means. Someone else called Blue chimed in and replied to the thing that Richie said earlier. Quote, and if you actually thought what he was saying was 100% truthful and his opinions not altered for comedic effect, etc., unquote. No one saying that and phrasing it like that is just a misrepresentation of the opinions of those arguing against you, which only serves to further cement the opinions of those who agree with you while pushing away those who disagree, which just hinders constructive discourse. And I'm going to say that that same sentiment can be said about Richie's previous comment when he said, if your ideology is exactly the same as others and that ideology denies certain realities and the only way you can deal when confronted with those realities is to name call or avoid them, blah blah blah, it's like, well, what does he consider reality? Because if he thinks that reality is something different than what I think, then again, I'm going to get accused of a cult-like mentality when I could be right and he could be wrong. But to continue with Blue's comment, to go the other extreme and say comedy is never based on truth would be equally absurd. Some jokes would be based on actual beliefs, other jokes wouldn't be. But even in cases where a joke isn't based on actual beliefs, it can still serve to cause harm or increase misconceptions or hate. If you can agree with the last two sentences, then it should just become an issue of looking at how often he jokes about a topic, how he jokes about it, how this compares to how often and how he jokes about other things, how others feel about it, and how he behaves the rest of the time to get an informed idea of his true beliefs and intent and the effects his jokes could have. Samantha did mention things relating to all of those factors in the video. Richie responded, but it's all in the context of a comedy bit which is always altered and fine-tuned for the most comedic effect. The only ones spreading hate and division are the people pretending to be outraged over jokes as if they were forced to watch this special. Everyone else is from all different backgrounds, races, sexual identities, are all laughing together. Really? Are they? Are they? And saying that we can never take comedy like a little bit seriously or truthful is, yeah, like Blue said, kind of bizarre. Because some comedy is based on observations of the real world. Like, some isn't. That doesn't mean that a topic like trans people, which is a real thing that exists in the real world, can never be talked about in a comedy special in a non-serious or a non-realistic way. Just look at how many shows I have of Eddie Izzard talking about being trans, growing up trans, and everything like that. That's a thing that's based on reality, but it's based on, like, real experience. And that's why it's not insulting or, like, pandering to some, like, low common denominator. Because, you know, Eddie doesn't need to do that. Blue's response was, quote, there is no difference between a trans woman and a non-trans woman, end quote. I expect very few people in the trans community or allies believe this. Samantha made videos about trans racialism and trans athletes not too long ago, and I recall those being quite fact-based and nuanced. The way you phrase the former makes your own bias rather clear, and the answer to the latter is much more complicated, so simple yes-no answers wouldn't really adequately address those questions. So I'll just refer you to those videos. Quote, in the biological context, how many genders are there, end quote. If you don't know yet that people in the trans community and allies and countless doctors and scientists would say gender is a social construct while sex is biological, then either you're new to this topic or you're really not even trying to understand either the opposing perspective or the underlying research on this topic. Richie then replied, yes, what you are referring to is gender identity, which is a social construct. Gender can also refer to biological sex. just like sex can refer to intercourse or gender. A gender role is also a social construct, but again, your biological gender, as in male or female, is not socially constructed, it's biologically constructed. Well, then it's not a fucking gender, is it? Okay, so if you agree there are real differences that should be acknowledged between trans women and non-trans women, then why are you disagreeing with what I said? Obviously you don't like the reality that there are differences and arguing that there are no differences. That's not what Blue said. When you say it's scientifically proven, what you are referring to is it's proven that a trans person does actually truly believe in their self-identity, and it's not a choice, and trying to match that gender identity can help. I completely agree. Okay, we've at least got some semblance of agreeing on facts here. But don't deny it is also scientifically proven we can determine the biological gender in all mammals with 100% accuracy, and a state of mind is not a factor in determining gender, nor does it change it. Wrong! Wrong, 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 wrong! Gender is a human social construct, and it is subjective. Animals, as far as we know, do not have a gender identity in the same way that we can say for humans. So, are you denying that gender identity is a state of mind? Are you denying the word gender can be used in the context to refer to someone's sex? Are you denying that we can derangement someone's biological gender with 100% accuracy? I think that means, I think he meant to say determine, but, you know, spelling errors and, you know, autocorrects can happen. I'm going to forgive that. Are you denying that having a gender identity doesn't change your biological gender? Are you denying that there are other self-identities beside gender that differ from people's biological bodies, like that trans people are truly believed by that person? Are you denying that trans women have a real and scientifically proven advantage over non-trans women in most sports because gender identity has nothing to do with the biology bodies because it's just a state of mind? I've already talked about trans women in sports. Refer to my 74-minute long opus of a video about trans women in women's spaces. But I was a little bit unaware of all this interaction with Blue when I responded to Richie, and only because of reading it back did I find it all, because I just saw the reply to my message in my sort of notifications. So my next comment went thus: can you stop accusing me of a cult-like mindset without evidence for your claim, please? You do not know me or my views on many things. You know one thing, that I find Chappelle special to be offensive and transphobic. And as a trans person, I think I'm the freaking expert. Obviously, I know that's not, like, true, but come on. I have life experience here on my side. It would be beyond the scope of one YouTube comment to answer all of your questions because the answers I would give contain a lot of detail and nuance. I can make a video especially for you, you snowflake. But you had better watch it all the way through and share all that other crap for me to justify spending that much time on it. This is one of the reasons why I wasn't even sure if I wanted to make this video. Richie responds, and I can guarantee you that in that video you will say the same things that others with your cult-like mindset have said. I mean, read through all the comments, it's exact same argument. You will say gender is a social construct while not understanding gender can refer to biological sex. Gender doesn't refer to biological sex, that's why we call it biological sex. You will call me transphobic as a bully tactic. No, I call people transphobic if they're being transphobic. And we will get into more detail on the difference between a person who is transphobic and a person who says or does a transphobic thing. You will deny that gender identity is just a state of mind, a real one, and your state of mind doesn't change your biological reality, etc. Well, no, actually, I'm saying that gender is it's a state of mind. You have a female state of mind, a male state of mind, or something else. But yeah, It does come from the mind. It does also come from social construction by, did I ever say that it was cut and dry? And no, the fact that I am trans, the fact that I am non-binary doesn't change my physicality. What changes that is if I choose to take hormones, if I choose to have surgeries, if I choose to do anything with my body, then it changes. You will say that trans people know their biological sex and know there is a difference, but then contradict that with every argument after that by denying things like trans women shouldn't be in women's sports because they have an advantage. Trans women in sports, professionally speaking, do not have an advantage over cis women. This has been not only backed up by official Olympics regulators since 2005, but also the fact that trans women who do compete need to have been taking hormone suppressants for at least a year before they're allowed to compete means that any physical biological advantage that they may have had no longer exists. I already know the ideology you've been indoctrinated to believe because everyone gets bombarded with it on a constant basis, and if anyone makes a point to the contrary, activists try to bully, shame, and silence them. Really? Because all I see is activists trying to correct misinformation about gender and trans people. So, you know, that's not the same thing as bullying. I think I know the difference. I've experienced enough of it. And saying you are the expert is weird because we're all human, so that would be like saying I'm the expert on human behavior because I'm human. Look, I know it's not a perfect fucking analogy, but I know more about trans shit than you do, bucko. Yeah, I started to get a bit pissed off, but, you know, you can kind of see why. So anyway, my response went like this. Oh, you can guarantee my responses? What's the point in me giving your questions the time of day if you've already decided you won't listen? And even if I surprise you with my answers, what will I have gained? Your validation? Fuck off. I don't need others to tell me I'm valid. And I'm saying I'm the expert because living as trans my entire life, I know firsthand how trans people are treated. You can't deny my experiences. These will differ from other people's experiences, of course, but by being an active part of this community, I'm aware of them too. But anyway, I want to leave that conversation behind because I think that's sort of run its course. Before I do, though, I will just address those questions. So, yes, of course, there is a difference between trans women and non-trans women, or cis women, as we call them. That's pretty much the same distinction as we have for a blonde woman and a brunette woman. The words trans and cis are just adjectives. No, I do not think gender identity is superior to all other identities. I don't think there is a superiority hierarchy of identities. That's some, like, bloviating Jordan Peterson shit going on right there. Is there a biological context in how many genders there are? Well, no, because I don't think that gender is biological in that sense. I think that it's in the mind, and I think that it's a social construct because that's how we use that fucking word. Can a male get pregnant? Well, trans men who have a working uterus could get pregnant. But male is a pretty biological term, so why don't we just say people who can gestate and people who can inseminate? So as to not get all bogged down in the equivocating of how to use the words male and female. And again, the trans women in sports thing, I've already addressed that. So the point really of that conversation was not to like address Richie directly. It was to show you, the audience, the level of discourse that's been happening surrounding this Dave Chappelle like whole drama-rama. Because there are some people who just do not seem willing to listen to what we, the critics, have to say. And this is even more evident in the next conversation that I will show you. Ugly Start said, Dave made jokes about black people in skits about black people, Asians, Jews, different religions, racism, etc. He hasn't just made jokes about trans. He talked about disabled people, crackheads, jokes about cultures, jokes about white people, fat people, literally everything. So I replied, does that mean that we can't criticize the transphobic stuff he said? I don't think so. I think it's best if trans people, the ones most likely to understand what being trans is really like, call out transphobia when it happens, don't you? They replied, I'm not trans, but I am bi, and also I'm not saying people don't have different feelings, but what I'm saying is he's not just out here targeting one whole group of people, he targets everyone in his jokes. I wonder why are trans the only ones upset? As a black woman, I've heard so many jokes about how black people have big lips and big noses and etc. Look, it's going to be okay. And look, I'm not saying that, I know much about black people stereotyping, okay, but I do know a lot about trans people stereotyping, and when I see that and when other trans people see that, we are not happy about it. Because we are still a very vulnerable minority, okay? I'm not saying that black women have it any easier than trans people in general. I'm just saying that, comparing these different minorities and the way that people from these minorities have reacted and responded to this one specific event isn't really fair, because the main focus of the special, the amount of time spent talking about trans people, was very much disproportionate compared to anyone else. So I replied, what I'm saying is that as a white trans woman, Samantha can speak on the issue of transphobia through her lived experiences and personal research, but she can't understand firsthand the struggle of what it's like to be a POC in America. So it's best let someone who is black speak on that part and criticize that part of Chappelle's special if needed. He did a bad thing. He's getting criticized for it. Don't use whataboutism as a defense against those same people for not calling out a different bad thing. Again, it's difficult because obviously someone who is both a racial minority and trans would probably be the best person to ask about the different racial comments and things that Chappelle and other comedians would like to make. It's harder for a white person to recognize racism just by virtue of not being a racial minority, whereas it's easier for us trans people to recognize transphobia because we've already experienced it and we know what it looks like. Now, I'm not saying that it's impossible for us to recognize racism, of course, but again, it would be a lot more difficult for us to notice a subtle racism rather than an overt one. But I don't think that's what this person was talking about, because they said, look, I have a lot of trans friends. Yes, people have different feelings towards it. The trans people I know even though they went through a lot in their life as well, aren't targeting Dave as a bad person. Now, I never said that Dave was a bad person. I said he did a bad thing. A trans woman died because of the hate that other trans was giving her because of something they didn't agree about. Let's talk about that then. Look, she is allowed to have her own feelings, we all are, and I love all people, and I laugh at all jokes, including jokes about my own self. And I used to want to get surgery to change my sex as well, just couldn't afford it at the time. So I get more than you think I do, but to target a person over some dark jokes is extreme. Lol. Getting kind of sick of seeing lol used as I'm trying to get this across in a friendly way, because that's not really happening well. But I get what you mean. I do. Some people like insulting dark jokes, all that sort of thing. If Dave Chappelle isn't willing to listen, then I think that's a problem with him. And I think people defending Dave Chappelle are also very much not willing to listen because they don't want it to be true. That, he did XYZ bad thing, or said XYZ bad thing. They then said, and this is quite long, And another thing, there are a lot of people on YouTube and people I know who are straight and used to be against the LGBTQ community who are now saying that it opened their eyes. They still have their preference, but they are admitting to being able to see things differently now in a positive way. This one guy I saw on YouTube, for example, was saying that he was uncomfortable being around trans, but after seeing the full special, he began to realize that the trans are good people too, with just a different experience in this human life, which is also something Dave was saying in his special as well. Once you get past the dark comedy and irony of his jokes, he also had positive and true messages as well. But yes, I know that it had hurt a lot of people. But isn't that life? We aren't going to all agree or see things the exact same way, but that doesn't make him transphobic. If you are trans, be proud of who you are. Who cares what a person jokes about? That's who Dave is. I'm surprised the feminists group isn't after him as well, which I fully support femme power too. But surprised though. Do me a favour and just love yourselves no matter what people joke about. I know it may have hurt a lot of y'all, and you feel like targets, but it doesn't mean a person hates a whole group of people. He was right about some things. What DaBaby said about gays was horrible, but it was okay when he killed a black man, but not when he says something bad. Everybody was cool with him killing but not talking about bad stuff. The point is, he was wrong for doing both things. He shouldn't have been cancelled too soon as he killed a man, another black man, and not just when he said something about y'all. It was wrong about both things, don't you get it? And don't even get me started on the racism in this world. But I can still laugh at funny black jokes and go on with my day, because I'm a strong black woman who is bi and a feminist and who used to want to be trans too. Yeah, I'm a weirdo, lol. So, I'm proud of who I am, not offended or targeted out. Just because a person makes jokes about a situation does not mean he hates all trans, that's all I'm saying. If you can't get that, I'm sorry. And yeah, okay, there's a lot there, but there's a lot there that I do agree with. I don't believe that Dave Chappelle hates trans people. And talking about the whole DaBaby situation, like, I don't really care about what this person did or said, because I don't really care about that person at all. I never heard about who that was until after they said homophobic stuff about AIDS. And, I mean, that's wrong, definitely. I didn't know there was, someone who got killed beforehand. So I can't really comment on things I don't know about. But bringing it back to the whole, real issue here is that, yes, people can joke about trans people. People can joke about whomever or satirize whatever they like, okay? Doesn't mean it's gonna be positively received all the time, and criticism is still gonna happen. This is what I'm doing. I am offering criticism. That is what happens when freedom of speech is properly upheld as a principle. However, I did have to point out some of the things that I thought were a bit of an issue there. So I said, it does not come across like he is merely laughing at the situation. He dead named a trans woman and called her a man. That's not funny insult comedy, that's just insulting. And why should we trans people be willing to accept poor, imperfect, misrepresentative, harmful, stereotyping caricatures of ourselves and say that's fine as long as some straight people are less shitty towards us, especially when good, accurate, positive representation exists? This was problematic. We are saying as much. Why are you trying to defend it as if it wasn't? Why are you ignoring us? So they said, yeah, there is different forms of comedy. Dry comedy, dark comedy, etc. Dave is not the only comedian to say insults or about trans, yet he is the only one you have an issue with? You guys must not watch a lot of stand-up comedy by many other comedians, because that doesn't seem fair either, especially when he has said some nice things as well, but hey, sorry all of you are offended, and that it had hurt your feelings. It's a tough world. Meanwhile, racism still exists, profiling, poverty, different forms of abuse and neglect, discrimination of other people's religions, and etc. is happening all over the world, which are more than just jokes. I mean, look at how far the trans community has come in our society, though, and be happy about that. Peace. You know I couldn't let that lie. I said, you assume Chappelle is the only so-called comedian I or anyone else has an issue with for being offensive? Far from it. Stop playing whataboutism as a defense tactic. It won't work and it's not valid. You see how I repeat the same kind of responses to these people? Because it's all the same kind of thing that I have to respond to. Like the same kind of arguments that get brought up against the backlash, i.e. me. Meanwhile, racism still exists, and who's ready to call out that shit? Oh yeah, me, and all the other people like me who are anti-discrimination of any kind. Stop assuming my motives or actions. I'm not the problem here. You've got a couple of other people there defending Dave Chappelle, like he did nothing bad, blah blah blah. Again, more whataboutism from someone called William Batts saying, I find it funny in most of the things you say Dave Chappelle already said about the black and other minority communities, and in fact you failed to notice that in the special. Did I say that I failed to notice that? I am talking about one thing, okay? I am talking about Dave Chappelle, in his comedy special, said things that are transphobic. That is a problem. That is the extent of what I am talking about. And all of these other people trying to pick other things going on really pissed me off. And you'll see that later, that it really pissed me off. So my replies were as thus. Chappelle absolutely did wrong. He did a bad job at representing what trans people are because he didn't take the time to learn and as such made lazy jokes from 20 years ago. I haven't really heard of Dave Chappelle before this, so I can't really comment about other material he's done. That doesn't make me a hypocrite to not call out anything else. It just makes you guilty of whataboutism. The topic at hand is transphobia, so going off on a tangent doesn't add value to this conversation. But of course, there are other people who have said or done transphobic things who I have talked about at length, proof on my channel of over 3 years worth of videos. So no, I'm not holding Dave to different standards than anyone else. The topic at hand is transphobia. Maybe I want to talk about how that is bad as a separate issue from that other stuff to avoid gish galloping. Your whataboutism is not an argument, see my above comment. This. I take it you're talking about Caitlyn Jenner. How about you ask me what my opinion is before just assuming that I would stand up for her? Which, again, there is a handy-dandy video on my channel about what I think about Caitlyn Jenner. I have no love for her, and Chappelle, nor anyone else, has the right to take the piss out of her. But for her actions and personality, not on the basis that she's a minority. That's not okay. And no, calling a trans woman, any trans woman, a man, isn't funny. It's hate speech. Here's where this conversation goes, and it's not fun. It's not fun for me. But again, it's all relevant, so let's dive in. Vibes said, that clearly ain't whataboutism. The point is that the comedy he makes for everyone. Just complaining about your own shows hypocrisy. If you haven't heard about Dave before then, do your research before you talk. That's like saying Long Beach Griffey sexist because of one of his women videos while ignoring all the men videos he made too. Someone saying that you don't know what you were talking about based on that ain't whataboutism. I'm sorry. How the fuck did I even manage to respond to that? I don't know, but here's what I said. No, you're wrong on many counts. If this is the comedy he makes, then given the backlash, I'd say it definitely isn't for everyone, nor to everyone's taste. That's fine. There's a difference between fact and opinion. If you like a thing I don't, that's okay. Unless the thing is likely to cause actual harm to other people. That's when I and others like me complain. The topic of conversation is one person who said very harmful and inaccurate things about a group of people he isn't a part of. I don't need to know other things he said in order to criticize the thing I heard that was bad. And yes, criticism is not the same as cancelling. I am one person, not a Twitter mob. So yes, you are engaging in whataboutism when you say, what about Dave's other material? Or what about X other person? They couldn't let that lie. No comedy is for everyone. That would mean that everyone is the same. Well, why say it in the first comment then? What? Also, it is clear you missed the point, because the same logic you use for it can cause harm can be done for all his other comedy, and even then your claim is without proof. It is like saying that video game causes violence. That is the logic you are on. You got zero proof for your jokes cause harm. I have lots of evidence, because people have been bullied and satirized many, many times, and then lynch mobs happened, so, you know. Actually, you do need to know when you are saying that he's being transphobic. It's hilarious how you missed the Long Beach Griffey point. Do you need me to repeat it again? Because it's clear you can't read or don't know what whataboutism means. I know what fucking whataboutism is! This fucking asshole clearly doesn't. Me saying that is his normal comedy and he ain't transphobic because he does the same with all groups ain't whataboutism. That wasn't what I was fucking talking about! Please go read up the meaning before you continue to make yourself look worse. Why don't you? I said, I don't know what Long Beach Griffey is, so I'm not commenting on it. I'm only commenting on transphobic things Dave Chappelle said. Your deflecting to other things is whataboutism. I didn't think it needed explaining in this day and age that someone misrepresenting trans people puts very skewed and biased views into other people's heads that they then take out into the real world and does impact how they treat trans people. It's never just jokes. Even Chappelle knows this because he knew he was being controversial when he said all the things. Misgendering a trans woman, painting an inaccurate caricature, etc. So then he said, you don't need to know Long Beach Griffey to get my point since I specifically laid it out. SMH, I'm done here. No, you didn't. You didn't actually point out what the fuck the point was talking about someone else. At all. Also, you clearly don't understand whataboutism. Where did I say, why didn't you criticize X? I said Dave ain't transphobic just because you only look at a single part of his comedy. You then even missed the Long Beach Griffey part where it further explains it. No, it didn't fucking explain anything, you cunt! Please go read back over. Still waiting on your proof about the jokes affecting people. So I said, Dave Chappelle said transphobic things. I and Samantha Lux and Jessie Gender and Kat Black and hundreds of other trans people are the fucking experts on receiving transphobic abuse. So believe us when we say what he said was out of line. Deflecting to anything else he or anyone else said is not the topic at hand and is a non sequitur fallacy. How about you go research hate speech laws and find out why just jokes do in fact affect others? And this is where you know this person is in an America-centric mindset, because the next thing they say is, there ain't no hate speech law in America. If you are talking violence, you have to prove that it causes violence, which you have not. Lol, you are clearly just throwing whatever fallacy you can, now while hilarious strawmanning me by doing so. A non sequitur is a fallacy in which a conclusion does not follow logically from what preceded it. I did follow your logic, buckaroo. Go reread, because you are just being dense on purpose now. Is it because your argument is failing? Keep strawmanning me. And hundreds others didn't say anything about it. You see how low logic goes? Unless you are trying for bandwagon fallacy, then this point means nothing. Yeah, I'm doing a stupid voice for this person, because, it's the only way I'm getting through it. Don't worry, this is the last post. I said, I know that there aren't hate speech laws in America. That's why I suggested you research them, and maybe you see why they exist to protect people in other countries like mine, the UK. Oh, and I'm not the one strawmanning the opposition, sweetie. I'm not saying majority rules. I'm just saying a substantial amount of people took issue with the comments about trans people. Maybe you just don't want to accept the reasons why. It's not that Chappelle or any other cis folks aren't allowed to make jokes about trans people. It's that these are tired, old, untrue stereotypes that feature us as the punchline, and we are fed up of it. The message isn't don't tell jokes, it's tell better, smart jokes. So that was a heck of a lot of stuff that happened. And I know that you might think, well, why did I even bother, having that kind of a discourse when it clearly just went so downhill? And the reason is that if somebody else finds that conversation, or if somebody else finds this video, I can then justify my position and say, look, here's what I believe, here's what happened, here's why this debate is going off the rails. I tried to have good faith arguments with people from the opposing point of view. But let's recap. So, I know that Chappelle knew that his comedy special would draw controversy. And that's why he said what he said. Like, I don't think he's an idiot. And I do think that he deliberately framed this as a free speech issue. Does he have the right to say what he said? Yes. I wish he didn't, but, you know, the point is that freedom of speech isn't freedom from criticism. And criticism isn't the same thing as cancelling. Here's a person who is rich and famous with a big platform. He ought to be responsible with that. Literally all I am saying. And I find it very insulting that people who are defending Dave Chappelle ascribe motivations to the people who are giving the criticism and the backlash without actually going through all of the nuance and everything of said criticism. So let's talk about that distinction that I mentioned earlier between a transphobic person and a person who says or does transphobic things. I believe that given everything that Dave Chappelle said, especially about his, friend who committed suicide, that although he was using that story to paint a bad light on people who criticize him or her or people who criticize in general, I don't think that he was intentionally being transphobic. I just think the things he said are very transphobic. When he dead named a trans woman, when he painted the image of a trans woman in a urinal, with all of the stereotypical, butch, manly, large hands and hairy and whatever else he said, I can't remember now. And, that's uncomfortable for him. Well, he still hasn't done the thing that he should have done, and that's put himself into the trans person's shoes, because that's just not a reality for trans women. Okay, we don't want to use urinals standing next to men. That's, dysphoria. That's dysphoria for us. There is a source of comedy there, and he's using the trans woman in the example as the punching bag, as the fucking punchline. It's just not smart comedy. Especially not in this day and age. But his intention was definitely to be controversial. His intention was to frame this as a freedom of speech issue, which he has done quite successfully. He's achieved that. But I would like to make the distinction that I don't think that he himself hates trans people. I just think he's disingenuous about us. Compare this to someone like J.K. Rowling, who she would claim that she doesn't hate trans people, but everything else she's said pretty much tells a different story. And she's become the Voldemort of her own story. He didn't think he was doing anything wrong at first. But then compare that to someone like Posey Parker, who literally wants men with guns in women's bathrooms to stop trans women going in. That's definitely hate. So to conclude all of this very, very long video, This is not to say that Dave Chappelle or anybody else who is cis can't talk about trans people, can't make jokes about trans people, or anything like that. You can say what you like, but again, raising and framing this topic as freedom of speech gives us the right to criticize you too. And, like, the fact that some trans people have defended him and like him and laughed at his comedy doesn't mean that he's beyond criticism or reproach from anyone. This whole debacle has reminded me very much of the video The Darkness by ContraPoints. And, well, I, just as much as she, is fed up of cishets making tired, old, stereotypical jokes about us, punching down at us, which, you know, aren't really funny, and ignoring other really funny material. But the thing is, we tend to be the best at making fun of ourselves. So, as an example, I can say the word fag and call someone that, call myself that, and it's funny and playful and, you know, can be endearing, could be empowering, could be, you know, anything like that. But coming from the mouth of someone who is cis and heterosexual, it has a different tone to it. It has very often in the past been used as a word that is bullying, hateful, spiteful, demeaning. So someone who is playing with that kind of language or that kind of topic really needs to be careful about the way they do it. That's literally all I'm saying. And if Dave Chappelle takes away anything, I want it to be that. If the defenders of Dave Chappelle take away anything, I want it to be that. Anyway, this is already super fucking long. I've got a lot of editing to do in front of me, and it's so dark outside. I've had to use like 2 fucking lights in one room, and my eyes are hooded, so yeah. But for now, do take care. Non-binary is valid. God damn it. Bye. I don't believe that Dave Chappelle truly hates all black people or all trans... Oh, fuck. It's men in guns. Men in guns. My trans flag fell down and I have no idea when that happened.